Now just let's new Awakening and Fates because one, they have the weaker villains. Two, there isn't much to say. That's repetition. And three, I want to get into Three Houses before we end because
Yeah,
I have so much to say about Three Houses and influence.
yeah,
So yeah, I
yeah.
think
So
Awakening has pretty weak villains, but they're definitely serviceable. Like they do the bare minimum. Like Gangrel is memorable and he's fun, but he's good pretty early on and he's kind of cartoonish, but he still works decently well. Volhart is basically a weaker Rudolph, but still a decent, and he has decent motivations. And I like the he wanted to become strong, not because he wanted to like take the gods. Plagia or Grimial are probably my least favorite evil cult because there isn't really that much interesting about them. They're just evil wizards who worship Grima. Bellider is probably my least favorite gang Donna for the same reason. He is just kind of there. Grima is really cool and wasted potential, and I really like the backstory they gave him in Echoes that basically made him an homunculi dragon, a dragon that was created by humans instead of God. But he isn't really used that well, and it's kind of simplistic. That's basically my take on
I think
Awakening villains.
I think for me the big problem with Awakening is the fact that it has 3 separate villains for 3 separate parts. Because they're all pretty decent. Gangrel, Walhart, and Valadar. They each have a decent foundation. They each have good aspects to them, good quality. But we don't spend enough time with them for them to really flesh out or develop.
Awakening is kind of like these snippets or like different like vignettes. Like I read that it's basically this Fire Emblem best of because it was the last game. So instead of creating one cohesive story, they created 3 smaller stories that basically sum up Fire Emblem as a whole.
Yeah.
And I get that that's kind of because why the villains kind of suffer. And again, like Gangrel is a really fun starter villain that kind of gives me the vibes of like an Arsenal world, or in a way that he is kind of this cartoonishly love to hate. He has an interesting motivation. At the same time, he's taking off way too soon. Wolfhard is basically a Rudolph, but he's a Rudolph with an interesting motivation and could have been a really cool character if we had spent more time with him than we got, and if he was more impactful because Wolm is basically the filler arc. Wilder is probably the least interesting Garner to me, but even then, because he doesn't really have that much of unique backstory or ideas to his character, but even then, he isn't that bad. He's just really underused and kind of generic.
Yeah, it's a case of splitting up the characters and not giving them enough time. Because if they had more time to them, if they had more time to develop or flesh out, I feel like they would be solid characters. Maybe not the best, but they would be far better than what we got.
And this is a big problem with Awakening in general. Like, it's a decent game, and probably wouldn't even be the best game, no matter the execution. I feel like a lot of its aspects could have been still better. Even if it wouldn't be the best game in the franchise, it still could be okay or good. It's okay now, but it could be. Yeah, that's basically my opinion on Awakening.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. It's the characters themselves are decent, but because of the fact that there just isn't enough to them, they fall off as unmemorable.
Yeah, they're kind of wasted potential, all of them. Kind of like could have been better. And also, I feel that they kind of like fall into the archetypes and they work well as those archetypes, but there are better examples of those archetypes both before and after.
Yeah.
But also, before we move on, I want to say one thing of Voyager that I really like. And that's the fact that he started, like, even if Voyager's design is kind of problematic, I also feel that Voyager kind of started to evolve where I feel that Garneff's, like, started to have better designs. Like, he has this sinister, evil wizard vibe, and I really like that vibe, even if it's kind of problematic. It's still, he has this really sinister design that's really cool, and I feel that the later Garners we could have also had really cool designs. I forgot to mention, but I actually like Vida's redesign in Shadows of Valentia.
Mm-hmm.
And we will get to Tolas. We will get to Tolas. So let's not waste any time. But yeah, before we talk about treehouse, I think we have to talk about the elephant in the room. That's fates. And I feel like my feelings on fate's villains is basically the same as my feelings with awakening, but worse. Like with awakening, you have decent, good foundation for solid villains, but the execution is just decent. With Fate, you have good foundation for solid villains. The execution is a mess. Especially Garon. Like I feel Garon is the one villain that like makes me frustrated. I know I said it a lot of times, and will say it a few times more. But Garon, like he could have been a really cool evil king or a Rudolph character that could have been complex and motivated and had interesting characterizations. And the fact that we side with the evil kingdom could have like given us more insight to him and like made him a really nuanced and interesting character. Instead, what we get is just basically a slime puppet to a dragon god.
Yeah, that's the worst part is that it's not even him. It's a puppet that replaces him. Because
Yeah,
like the Norian siblings, they're always telling us, "Oh, father is such a great person. He loves us so much. He cares for me so much." And then he's just like, "If you disobey me, I'm gonna kill you." Like
yeah,
the disconnect is so apparent.
yeah,
It's
it
like they're
is.
living in a false reality where they perceive him as something that he's not.
And
And the reason for that is
that's
because they know the real him, but we're never shown that version of him. We're only ever
yeah,
shown the
exactly.
puppet.
And like I feel that while I'm okay sometimes with Fire Emblem using more fantastical elements, like with the morphs, I feel that Fates really suffers. Like I wish that Garen we had gotten was the real him and that we had fleshed out. Because like, had we gotten a Garen that wasn't just a slime puppet, but was the actual king, was the actual person, we could
Hmm.
have probably one of the better villains, if not the best villain in the entire franchise. Because having seen the evil king and seeing what he is like and what he acts, and getting this really close connection to him if you side with his action, that have been really cool
Yeah.
and make him probably a really great character. Instead, what we get is basically an empty shell. And that sucks. Again, I don't mind the empty shell thing, like with Hardin or with Regard, or the possession thing, whether with Hardin, or the empty shell thing with Regard. With Garen, it just feels like missed opportunity. Like with Regard, you still get Lion, who was one of the best villains in the entire franchise, but Anakas is another character that's just incredibly frustrating. So, like, you don't even get a good villain. Instead of having one good villain, really good villain, you get two villains that could have been good, but are just incredibly frustrating.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I fully agree.
Yeah. Do you have any more to say about Garon, or do I move on to Anakas?
Um, the only other thing I can say is that I feel like it would have been a much stronger presentation if in Birthright they presented him as like this cruel tyrant and like this maniacal dictator because that's what Hoshido perceives him as. That's their reality. But then in Conquest, we see a softer side to him, a more caring side, someone who cares for his people, who's trying to provide for them.
That would be
That would have
actually,
that would have been so much better. But
yeah, it would have been,
unfortunately,
it would have been amazing.
they decided to just characterize them exactly the same in every
Yeah.
route, and
And making really
it's
cartoonishly
disappointment.
evil.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Like having two different routes, you can accept to having two different perspectives and
yeah.
having this really nuanced and layered character. But at the same time, like we just didn't get that. We just got a really simple character. Like
Hmm.
I wish we had gotten more than just this evil emperor guy who was evil because. But yeah, it's kind of funny because like they basically did this in three houses, and we got one of the best, but also one of the most divisive characters with it. So like this makes me think that had we gotten this Garen who was like really brutal in Birthright, but really complex and caring and well intended in Conquest, would Garen be like a big discourse magnet where you would be like people would argue that he's either super problematic or Garen did nothing wrong? I
I
want
want
to
to live
really
it. I
live
want to
in
live in the timeline where I can tweet hashtag Garen did nothing wrong.
same. I want to live in that timeline. I really want. Like, Garen is probably the one villain that like could have been really good,
Yeah.
but execution is just Uh,
Just
kind
not
of like
there.
with Nergirl, and a certain villain we will talk about very soon. Actually, two certain villains, because before we go into Three Houses, we will talk about Anakos, because I don't think there's really much to say about Ponce or Iago. They work their roles, they do it pretty well, kind of cartoonish, but
I think
not really much to
honestly,
say.
I think Iago is actually fine. Like he's the only villain that I wouldn't change because he's just cartoonishly evil, but he does it in a fun way. He's
Yeah,
okay. I actually like him.
yeah, yeah, I like Iago too. Like, it's funny because I said that I don't like his archetype, but then I realized I like Ryu a lot. I like Iago, and I kind of like Sam, like I kind of have something on him, but like Izuka is the only one that I don't actually like. The
Hmm.
more I think about it,
Yeah,
but yeah, like Iago is pretty. He is okay. Like he
yeah,
works well, and I feel like Hans also works decent enough, but that's about it.
yeah.
Like
Hans is like fine
I feel
enough ish, but I would actually
he
call
could have
Iago
been better.
enjoyable.
Yeah, like Iago is like really fun. But
Yeah.
yeah, before we move on to Tree Houses and talk about how Tree Houses has both the best and the most disappointing villains at the same time, let's talk about Anakos. I feel my issue with Anakos is kind of what you talk about with Orshnard and with Talia. We talk about that Anakos isn't bad by himself. Like, I feel he has a really cool concept. The idea that he's this dragon that once was that got corrupted and he kind of tried to fight against it, and because of that he created this huge scam where he manipulated everyone. That's a really cool concept and I love it.
Hmm.
That is a problem. And as a concept or as his backstory isn't a problem. The problem is the fact that Anakos is in Fates. That's the main issue. He's a character that should have had been in a different game, because Fates is all about Hoshido and Nor, their different dynamics, and the war. We don't need this third hidden kingdom made of water magicians and water dragons and have their water dragon king that once was benevolent and but then became corrupted. We don't need that for Fates. That just makes things more convoluted and takes from the main appeal, that is the conflict between Hoshido and Nor. And sure, one could argue that the same is kind of with Ogotans, but at the least, Ogotans beat the world and them to teams to three houses. Anakos doesn't fit to the world or teams to Fates. That's the issue.
Yeah. Even as one of the like only 6 Fates fans alive, I say that Revelation is a terrible game. It is the worst Fire Emblem game ever, and it's the only Fire Emblem game that I actually hate. And the reason I hate it is because everything, every conflict, every problem, every single thing in the story is caused by Anankos. He is the driving force behind everything, and
Honore
it just
Anangos.
removes character agency from everyone. It gets rid of
Yep.
any complexity, any nuance, any kind of discussion about Hoshido and Nor and their conflicting
Yeah,
ideologies,
exactly.
and it's all gone. Everything is just
Yeah,
gone.
and exactly. And like, I don't mind villains like manipulating behind the scenes. Like, Anankas, it kind of gets to the whole evil levels that I was
Hmm.
behind everything. And Evil this release was fun. Like, Anankas is decent as a concept, but again, like you said, it doesn't work in a story like Fate, because Fate is all about Hoshido and Nor.
Yeah.
And then you just have this, okay, actually, this dragon got caused at everything, and I'm just, wait, what? And this kind of like characterizes my problems with Fire Emblem stories as whole, is that they want to be complex. They want to tell a story of nuance. They want to tell a tragic story of war and how things are complex and tragedy and grief. And they do a pretty good job, but they still have these mastermind villains who are behind everything and who like nullify every interesting conflict and character agency. Agotans kind of do the same thing, but at the very least, Agotans are more tolerable in the sense that they don't remove every character agency and are kind of more in shadows. Whereas Anankas basically causes everything, and he don't. There's also one thing that also makes Agotans better than Anankas for me, and that's the fact that Anankas only appears in one route, and then he like ruins everything. a lot of leads are scattered throughout the game, and they like cause enough of like things behind the shadows that it makes sense. But they don't hijack the story, and everything isn't caused by that. But yeah, now that we have talked about Among Us, let's finally move to Tree Houses. Finally,
That's what you've been waiting
it's like
for.
yeah, we have because like Tree Houses is one of those games that I have a lot to say about its villains, a lot, and I think that you have a lot to say too.
Quite a bit, yeah.
Yeah. Like I when we talk about that Sacred Stones and Telios and Burning Blade have the best villains. And then some other games like Judgral or Awakening of Fate have weaker villains. So Treehouse is kind of there in between that I feel that Treehouse has both the best and not necessarily the worst, but like the most disappointing villains in the entire franchise. And unlike Juggernaut, but even to different extent, since like Three Houses has more complex story and more nuance, and it's more like written. It's more a story than a game. Like when uh, genealogy's big appeal was the gameplay and the way the game story is told via gameplay. I feel Treehouse's big appeal is the story. Like the gameplay is fun and all that, but the reason I like Treehouses and why I have spent more time is the story. I have thought more about the characters and their motivations and about the world and the world's complexities than I have actually spent time playing the game because the story and the characters are more interesting to me than the game itself.
That makes sense. I can see that.
Yeah, I think that we should probably start with like, what do we even start with? Do we start with Flame Emperor or do we start with the Guardians? Or wait, I know exactly what we can start with. Let's start with the Death Knight.
Oh, that's a good place to start.
Yeah, because like the Guardians are like really big deal, and like the Flame Emperor is another really big. Like all the other villains, the Guardians as whole, because I feel it's best to talk about them as whole. Even if like I do have a few things to say about each of them as characters, it makes more sense to talk about them in like one group and then kind of like mention things about each of them. The Flame Emperor and Rhea, they all like have like a lot to say about them. Dead Knight, I
Yeah.
don't have as much to say. Like, I really like Dead Knight. Like, Dead Knight is basically a slightly worse Black Knight. He has the same sense of mystery and coolness, and he is this really powerful, cool, sinister knight who you fight over and over again. And he really likes fighting Violet, and I think he fulfills his purpose pretty well. He's a really interesting character, and I like Teresa, and I like the fact that Teresa and Midnight are technically the same character, but also not. And I think that Midnight is also an, uh, an anti-villain, but also not in the typical Camus sense that he's a honorable, or he's honorable, but in a different way
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
makes him really,
he has his own sort of like take and perspective on that.
yeah. But yeah, Death Knight is like, he isn't the most complex villain, and he's basically a slightly worse Black Knight. Even if I like the identity reveal with Death Knight better than with Black Knight, because like it makes sense to have. It makes more sense to like reveal Death Knight's identity than it does to Black Knight. I don't know why it just does. And also, I feel that Death Knight it isn't as invading as with Black Knight.
He's a lot more of a simple character for sure, but he plays the role that he needs to, and it works out nice.
The one could argue that Teresa is kind of complex, but also Dead Knight is pretty simple, and like much of the complexities is more like in subtext and in Teresa's supports than anywhere else. And it's a nice set of complexity, but Dead Knight doesn't necessarily need it. So yeah, he's a solid one, and I like him.
Yeah. I wish
So
I
yeah,
wish he was
now
involved a little more in the story. Like I wish it was more than just he shows up like 3 or 4 times, but he plays the role that he needs to, and he is still a very good character.
he's very good. And also one thing more thing before we move to the big boys, the big ones. Because like has three big major ones that I have mixed feelings about all of them to an extent. But then one thing I really like the scene where like the nukes come and then I like saves Violet and goes, hey, by the way, something dangerous happens. So here, like I feel that adds depth to his character and shows that he isn't just this evil, battle hungry warrior,
Yeah,
but he's
for
also a
sure.
decent
It's
person.
a really nice little scene. It's small, but it's something nice.
Yeah, it's one of those things that adds a lot to the character. But yeah. In which order should we go? The big ones? Should we like because like you can go in any order.
I'd say let's do Flame Emperor first, just so you can finish on your 5 hour round.
Yeah, yeah. Like Flaming Pearl, like I feel with all of the villains, I have like a lot of things I really like about them, but a lot of things I really dislike about them. Like even more than with some of the villains we before talked about. Like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of mixed feelings. But Flaming Pearl is the one that I have like the most positive option, I guess. Yeah, I think that Flame Emperor is a really good villain, and I would say that they are one of the objectively better written villains. And I feel it's because okay, should we like drop the identity or should we okay maybe first? But yeah, I think that the reason why Flame Emperor works so well is because they're a character that's built to the story and they support the story very well. They appear really often and they help a lot to the story's narratives and a threat and presence throughout, both the first half and the second half. And now I'm dropping the mask. Outside of the Lion, Flame Emperor, aka Edelgard, is one of the two villains that's more or less carries the game therefrom. Three Houses is largely built around Edelgard, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, yeah.
And I feel that she is one of the best villains in the game, simply because in the franchise, simply because of how complex it is. She's a character that can be written in seen in so many ways. While I personally am frustrated with the Edelgard discourse, on the other hand, the fact that we have so many discourse and so many different opinions is, in my opinion, testament to her character. It shows how well written she is when there's like many different options on her. Like people love, hate, and feel different things about her. Personally, she isn't my favorite character in the game, largely because I'm proud of the discourse, but she's definitely a really well written character. I understand people would see her as sympathetic and a character who genuinely wants good and is a revolutionary, but at the same time, I understand those people will see her as gone too far and as a villain rather than a hero, and that's what makes Irigor one of the best characters in Fire Emblem because she can be seen as either a hero or a villain, and both interpretations are right.
Yeah, I think part of the reason why there's so much discourse is because I feel like your perception of her is implicitly influenced by whichever route you started on. So if you started with Black Eagles and you went with her first, you're much more likely to see her perspective and to understand where she's coming from. Whereas, let's say if you did Blue Lions first, you might be much more opposed to her perspectives.
Yeah, exactly. Because Blue Lions is largely written in a way that you sympathize with Dimitri, and because Dimitri doesn't like Edelgard and sees her as bad, it's more likely that you don't like Edelgard either. Because
Hmm.
I feel that people's views largely like reflect on which route you start first. And I definitely can confess this is the case because I started with Golden Deer, and because Golden Deer kind of like portrays Edelgard in a more neutral light, and like she's still the bad guy, but you kind of like understand her motivations. I kind of get the feeling of Edelgard how you will feel about most Rudolph characters, like a well-intended extremist type of villain who you understand the motivations, but I don't necessarily agree with, especially when Claude basically has the same motivations with a more peaceful solution to them.
Yeah. A
And
Claude
that's
and Golden Deer is much more of a middle ground, much more of a
mm,
sort of compromise of ideologies.
yeah, like he wants change like Edelgard, but he also goes it more peacefully. But yeah, that's one thing that I really like about Edelgard is the way the game is written around her. Like pretty much every other major character can be seen as a foil or a contact with her. She shares similarities and parallels and contrasts with Claude, Dimitri, Freya, and even Violet to an extent, as much as you can consider Violet an actual character. And I really like that. I like how every major player can be contrasted and compared to with Edelgard. And that makes her while she doesn't have personal relationships with every single one of them, it still makes her a really complex and nuanced character to the way different characters are reflected to her. And
Mhm.
also, Edelgard is actually the example I come to when I talk about Harding and Orson, about having a character that like grows with you and helps you. And I feel Edelgard is the only example of a character that does that full idea well, because with Harding, it's in two different games, and with Orson, you don't have enough time. With Edelgard, not only is she the main villain, she's a character you spend like half of the game with if you choose Black Eagles and Gold
Yeah,
Silver Snow. And that really is a thing that makes her character work. It's that how you see her, you interact with her, and you learn her worldview. And that's what makes her really powerful.
it's also a very small detail, but the fact that the main song is basically all about her and from her perspective of events, it's very telling. The game is centered around her. Even when you don't side with her, she's the central antagonist. It's focused around her ideologies, her path
Mm.
to change the world, whether you side with her or oppose her. She is in essence the main character.
Yeah, she is. And that's actually a thing that I really like about it.
Hmm.
And she's like, alongside Lion, she's like the one character that the game is revolved around, because usually the villains are more kind of like afterthoughts, and even the really good ones like Zephiel or Sephiron, they're still like not the stars of the show. But just as much as Sacred Stones is about Lion, Three Houses is more or less built around Edelgard.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's something I really like.
Those
And
those two are probably the biggest examples of building your antagonist together with your protagonist and having them come together to tell the story.
and also in Three Houses case, but also with Sacred Stone to a lesser extent, explore the themes of the game. And
Yeah,
sure, the other three lords and Rhea are important to the story, but not to the same extent as Edelgard is. She's the linchpin. She's the character that keeps it all together, and whether you love her or hate her, she is the essence of the house, and that's what makes her really powerful.
yeah.
Before we move on to the characters that I have more mixed feelings about, I have two things that I want to say about Edelgard. One kind of funny detail, and one that's kind of meta thing that I really love about Edelgard I see no one mentioning.
Hmm.
The funny detail is when you mentioned Edge of Dawn, I find it interesting how Edge of Dawn plays in credits of every single route but Crimson Flower, her own route.
Yeah,
And Crimson Flower instead replaces his Color of Sunrise, which is an instrumental version.
yeah,
And I feel that has this symbolism of like you siding with Edelgard and showing the way. So that's why she doesn't have regrets, because Edge of Dawn
yeah.
like
The
shows
song
her
is about her.
regrets.
It's about her regrets. She wants to side with Violet. She wants her professor to work with her. She doesn't want to fight.
Yeah. And that's something that's what I really like about the song and the way it's used. But yeah, the other thing I wanted to add is again a meta example. I think that the Edelgard is really good. Not because like she's pretty much a Rudolph character, but like they can do that different. But what Edelgard breaks isn't like a villainous archetype or anything like that. She's a Rudolph through and through. What she breaks is the role of female characters. Because when you think about it, female characters in Fire Emblem or major female characters come in two packages. You have the female characters that are kind of damsels in distress and kind of like treated as glorified plot devices, and their characters aren't necessarily about them and their agency, but rather about their powers, their identity, and the uh, role in the story, and the things the villains want to do with them, such as with Nina or Deidre or Deidre, I think, how it's spelled, or Ninian. Or then you
Hmm.
have the female lords like Lynn or Erika or Celicia or Mikaya. And they're more active characters, but they're still just part of the story. They aren't necessarily driving it as much as the male counterparts or like indifference. Ada is basically the only female character that's largely she not only has agency, not only has a goal and motivation that like drives her, she's the driving force of the entire game. Like the only other character that you can say that of in Fire Emblem is Rhea. And she's from the same game as Edelgard.
Yeah. It's a major step forward for sure, because it breaks out of these pre-assigned archetypes.
Yeah, or like what female character in Fire Emblem can be
Yeah.
and can do. And yeah, that's something I really like. And I really like that we had our first female Rudolph. And I really hope that we get more like breaking conventions. It's like what you can have your character archetype be like. And what gender they will be in the future. But Edelgard is already an amazing step forward, and I feel her character like sums up Tree Houses, not only its themes, but also the fact that Tree Houses is an incredibly ambitious game that wants to break a lot of conventions of Fire Emblem. And that's why I love
really
it.
does. It's very experimental, and not everything works, but what does work is so good.
Yeah, like at its best, Tree Houses is like the best Fire Emblem game. At its worst, it's okay. It's still good. It's still not as bad as Fates, for example.
Thanks
So
for
yeah.
hurting me.
I'm sorry. I haven't even played Fate, so like
Please don't.
I just went for the low hanging fruit. But yeah, Edelgard is great. But now let's go into the ones that I'm more mixed on. Like I don't think they are bad. There's some really good aspects of them, but I feel that the execution isn't as good as with Edelgard. So yeah. I kind of like want to go with Orgotans first. I know I have more things to say about them than I do with Rhea, and I want to talk about them more than I do about Rhea.
That's fine.
So yeah, should we go Rhea first?
All right.
But also, Orgotans are kind of more connected to Edelgard than Rhea is.
Yeah.
Even if Rhea is basically Edelgard's foil for the main opponent. So you decide.
I think we can do Rhea first.
Yeah. I feel we have less to say about Rhea.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Rhea. I'm very mixed with Rhea. On one hand, she's my least favorite character in Three Houses, but on the other hand, I like aspects of Rhea. But I feel that she's one of those characters that's really misused. Like Rhea is presented as this really calm and sweet and motherly figure, but as the game progresses, you learn that she doesn't have everything home. Like she is kind of controlling and manipulative and chimmy, and also kind of despotic. If you think about it, like the way how she punishes people, and that's all really good and makes it really interesting. The problem with Rhea isn't Rhea. She's a really interesting character, and I think I like her backstory. I like her personality. I like the way the game initially presents her as, and the way that it tracks. My issue with Rhea is more or less how the game kind of boobifies her in the end. Like in Crimson Flower, she's kind of treated kind of cartoonishly evil, and that's nice. Like I like Rhea as a villain. I think she's kind of cartoonishly evil, but it works. She kind of was mad because Violet decided to side with Edelgard, and Edelgard is bad in her eyes because she tries to destroy the status quo, and Rhea is kind of the representation of status quo. So I really like that. My issue with Rhea comes from the other three houses or other three rows. How like in Blue Lion, she vanishes. She's fine, but she just vanishes.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
Silver Snow and Verdant Wind, she comes back, she kidnaps, and we save her. But instead of like, it basically just pulls the rug off and like tries to like put everything shady and all the cool build up under the rug. And he said, boo boo, she's sad. And she's so tragic and she had a fucking backstory. So understand her. Sure, she did bad things, but she's still a good person. You boo. Even if it really contradicts with what we had so far in the build up as well as Rhea's characterization, the game really wants to frame Rhea as sympathetic. And I think it's okay. The way it does it, it just boobifies her and goes, oh, look, Rhea did nothing wrong. When she did many things wrong.
I think what's a little frustrating is throughout the first part, especially in the beginning when we first get to the monastery, Gerald is always telling us, don't trust Rhea. Be careful around Rhea. Don't listen to what she says. And then every path except for Crimson Flower, we trust Rhea. We save her. We take her place in the church. It completely goes against what we were told to do, what we were warned about.
Yeah, exactly. And Gerald is someone we can trust, especially more than Rhea. Rhea is a really unreliable character, and for the first half, she shows really shady things. She does shady things, like the whole thing with the Western Curse and how Rhea says, we must kill them all. We must kill all the heretics and all the other shady implications. The way how she's super obsessed with Violet and the way how she's really interested in reviving Sodis, all that. And then we just save her. And trusting Rhea isn't just saving her and letting her go. Also, it's kind of ties to how, in a medicines, we trust everything she says. Like, we find out the whole backstory by Rhea exposing it to us. Like the whole thing with Napoleons and Nobotans. While there are implications scattered throughout from both sides, mainly throughout boss dialogue with the major Agotan enemies, as well as in the Amakuli, and set its characterization as well, and Flame. I almost committed Flame error, sir. I'm sorry. Flame is good. But yeah, so I really like those snippets, but then Rhea just like, she exposes it and dumps the whole thing, and she just explains the whole backstory to us.
Yeah.
And why should we trust the one character who the whole game has shown is shady, who the whole game has told us that we shouldn't trust her?
Everything she says is a half-truth, so why is this now the full truth?
Yeah, exactly. And like, one thing I really don't like about Edelgard discourse is how people complain about Edelgard believing in the church she found out, when it was most likely KVC Tosus Slytherin Dark manipulating her.
Mm-hmm.
But can't it be the same said about Rhea? Like, why are the players, especially those who complain about Edelgard having half truths or outright lies, why are we believing Rhea? Like, also it comes.
I also think the game is a little hypocritical because we're told, oh, the Agarthans are bad. They experimented on people like Edelgard and Lysithea, and they're doing blood curses and stuff. And what does Rhea do? Experiment with people and try to recreate Sothis and kill people for it.
Rhea manipulates people and she does experiments. She creates her own.
It's the exact same methods. It's just it's presented as, this is a good thing, this is a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's framing. It's like framing, because like Rhea is good, and everybody else are good because Dragon's good. Agarthas are evil because they are sinister evil wizards with sinister designs. Even if some of them have really cool designs, we will get to that later.
Mm-hmm.
But they have this evil wizard aesthetic, and also, but yeah, I feel like I don't mind Rhea being a complex, sympathetic character. But I wish that the game didn't go Navadian's good, Gotan's bad. Like, I wish the game had done more nuance with it, especially when, like, another reason this is hypocritical is because Treehouse is largely about nuance and layers and how things are complex and nothing is black and white. It's kind of the Tellius thing.
I wish Rhea suffered more consequences. She gets off on pretty much every route.
Every route with Crimson Flower, and sure, she dies on Silver Snow, and both Setheth and Claude kind of pulled her out, but it felt more like a slap on the wrist that Setheth and Claude pulling her out. And it especially feels very out of character for Claude when you consider that Claude kind of casually mentions how he won't be fine if Rhea was dead. And no, I'm not saying we should have killed Rhea in Verdant Wind, but also I'm saying that she should have had more consequences than just, a slap to the wrist, more or less.
Yeah.
The closest we get is how in Silver Snow, her as support, she like says, oh, I'm a bad person and I'm going to abdicate the throne. But that's about it.
Who supports Rhea?
Yeah, true. And Rhea's like the hardest character to support. Like, I know some people
I have never gotten higher than B with Rhea.
Yeah, exactly. Me neither. Like,
Hmm.
I would like to get just for the sake of completionist, but that's
Yeah.
about it. And that's one thing that I really don't like about Free Houses is like how it locks some information into supports, especially the S supports.
Hmm.
Like with Dimitri saying that he isn't going to be magically fixed and always live with his mental illness. And that's only if you like support him you find that out.
Yeah.
I'm just that's important characterization. Darn it. But yeah,
It's an interesting method of storytelling.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, Rhea is a good or she's an interesting character and I like aspects of her. But at the same time I feel that Rhea exemplifies Three Houses issues really well. Like the way that Three Houses wants to be complex, but at the same time lies back to these tried and true Fire Emblem tropes, and as such acts hypocritical of like how what the game wants you to believe, and what the game actually presents.
It's kind of funny for a game so experimental, it falls back on its tropes at the most important moments.
Yeah, exactly. And for a game that tries to be morally gray, it's still like has this really simple black and white dichotomy of good and evil.
Hmm.
Let's get to the big one. Oh boy.
You've
Yeah,
only been waiting
Guardians.
3 hours for this.
Yeah, I have waited like for 5 hours. But yeah. Guardians, so I have very mixed feelings on because on one hand, I think I really like some aspects of Forgottens, and I think Forgottens are in a sense underrated because people just see them as an evil wizard club, which they sure are, but I feel they are more than that. But at the same time, I feel that I have a lot of issues with the Forgottens, so they're really mixed bag for me, even more so than any of the villains that we have previously mentioned. And considering my feelings on villains like Negril or Gardner, that's saying a lot.
Hmm.
So, I guess I start with what I like about the Gardens. So, I really like them as a concept. I feel that the whole idea, like I discussed with Luxurians back like many times ago, I really like the idea of them like being this crazy civilization that like once upon a time was like in power, but then after a war they had to perish, and because of that they like harbored this revenge for centuries upon centuries, and either they themselves or their descendants. It's kind of like by age, like it's kind of implied they are semi-immortal, but I also come with the view that they also like had descendants, and the ones that we see now aren't the ones that fought studies a millennia ago. So I really like that as a concept, and I also like that it's more vague whether or not Ogotans, like the ones that became Ogotans, the humans that fought against studies, whether or not they were good or evil. Like, sure, there are implications that suggest that the Forgottens were banished for good reason, that they became power hungry and sought for power. But at the same time, I get the feeling that they like were banished for wrong reasons, that and their banishment was a bit too extreme. And that's something I like. I like the ambiguity of their situation, that whether or not they were justified. And even if you could argue that they were justified, I feel that having someone or a group of people imprisoned for so long is just unfair for them and their descendants. Like, no matter how many bad things they did, no one should be punished like that. Like, no wonder like they became corrupted. Like, that's awful. And that's what I love about them. I love how Gordon's like probably had once a noble goal, the idea of like returning back to the surface. That's a very understandable goal. And their revenge against Sodis is understandable. Like, they saw Sodis as the evil force that like drive them away. It's understandable of wanting revenge. But over time, this desire of revenge evolved and twist, unintended, into this mess. Like, God, as we see, they are really evil and do nasty things like experiment on people and do and manipulate wars and conflicts, and that's really nasty. But, like, I love the corruption. I love the way how they most likely started as noble intentions and understandable intentions, but over time it just warped into this sense of madness, and the way how they view themselves as the real humans and they view the current humans as like subhuman or like monsters. that's really both messed up, also a really good detail, and I love it so much. Another thing that I really like about Argotans is their aesthetics. I love the way they look like these sinister tokusatsu as villains, and they also have really cool designs. Wallace probably has my favorite designs of all Fire Emblem villains. He just has this really imposing and evil and sinister design. It also looks really cool and badass. It's really hard to explain, but I feel it's the armor and the cape and just the color scheme and just everything about his design. And I love the way how Shambhala is like this futuristic lair. I love how Gotans like they are dark magic creatures, sure. But they're also technically advanced because their civilization were advanced. So they have these remnants of their technology. And they have the dark magic is kinda inclined to be also science and kind of connected. That's really cool. And I love the nukes, even if the nukes feel out of place. Their way how we have this powerful technology that's so out of place of the world, and it feels so different compared to others. So sorry, I just hijacked this because I have so much to say about the Gothams.
No,
I have too
it's
much.
okay. It's okay.
Yeah,
I really
I,
love hearing this.
yeah. I feel there's so much to love about the Gothams, like their motivation and backstory, and their concept, their designs. I haven't even got to voice acting like we talked with Berkut, how much voice acting adds to Berkut's character. I feel like the Gardens do the same thing. Like, sure, you could argue the Gardens are pretty simple characters, especially when you compare to Berkut or some of the other ones we talk about. But the voice acting really adds to them, and there gives them a bit depth, and that's just, I feel the performances are criminally underrated. But this isn't even my favorite thing about Logothans. My favorite thing is that hot take. I generally think that Algorithms fit the tree houses and themes and story perfectly. Like I don't think the execution is well done. We will go to that. But I feel on a conceptual level, they fitted a story, game story but well. Like tree houses is all about perspective and how like different views are different and the work of history and how the motivations. Like artists fit the themes perfectly. Like there are different perspectives. They like have this different opinion on so this was like treated as this goddess, but like then the villains see her as a monster. That's really clever. I also love how we have this also has this theme of cycles of revenge and like how far is too far, like how long can good intentions exclude like just by extreme leaves and like goddess are like one of them schemes but the extreme like the whole idea is revenge, the whole characterization around them, especially Paulus, but like goddess as well even, is the idea that they're obsessed with revenge and obsessed with like taking back the surface and like you're this twisted mirror in a sense, like they have like they're going too far for what they see as the greater good and they see themselves as the good guys, like the way Solon introduces himself as the savior of all. I feel that sums up Gordon's really well because like, Gordons see themselves as the heroes. They see themselves as justified even if they do horrible acts, even if like they kidnap numerous children and experiment on them, even if they cause a ton of wars, it doesn't matter because they see it as for the greater good. They see it as part of the purpose, and like they just don't care what they have to do to get their goals done. And that's a really not only really good villain motivation and villain characterization, it also fits really well to Three Houses as well. And like how all of the characters, all the lords in Rhea, they all like have this sense of revenge and this sense of like having a very specific ideology and value that they're willing to fight for and even do dirty things for. And Aquarius is just that on another level. They're completely evil, but they still think they are the heroes.
Yeah.
And I feel that fits perfectly to Three Houses as a story and to its themes. And that's a big reason why I love Aquarius. And in general, I just love villains who like think they're in the right, even if they are so fucking horrible. And just Aquarius just fits so perfectly to that. I just need a break now because like my mouth is completely dry. But
There's
yeah,
definitely a lot to love. The lore is so interesting, so fascinating. Just we don't get to learn too much about how the organization works in modern times, like the structure of it and everything. But the bits that we do learn, like how they infiltrate, they disguise, all of that, it's really cool, like really interesting. And then, like you said, how futuristic they are, how advanced they are. I think that's kind of the next step up from Tellius, where we had deities and gods. Now we're moving into the technological world. It's like we're
exactly, like
advancing
it
to modern,
advancing.
something more
Yeah,
modern.
and I feel that. Yeah, and I feel that Fire Emblem in general is kind of moving towards more modern or science fiction direction, like with Fire Emblem Heroes Book 5, or the whole idea that Awakening was originally meant to take place on Mars. It
Hmm.
feels like they have really wanted to do this for a long time. Even stuff like Gates had some implications with some technology here and there. Like, this is like the first, like, concrete we see of stuff that has already been implemented
Yeah,
slowly but surely. And I just really love that. And just something that relates to both the lore and implications as well as the futuristic technology. I love how it's heavily implied that the Ogartans are either mutated humans, cyborgs, or both. Like the whole thing where Paulus says to Cronia that the secrets of our bodies, if they discover it, and the whole thing, and how
yeah,
Cronia has the Crestone heart, and apparently the reason why both Paulus and Solon has those weird eyes is because they are prosthetics. At least in Solon's case, I'm not sure in Paulus, but in Solon's concept art, it was confirmed that his weird eyes is prosthetic. So, like,
mm,
that's just so cool. I love the whole fact that they're basically cyborgs as well as mutated humans because of the fact that they didn't see sunlight for centuries. They had like a lot of like they are like ghastly out because of that. Like there's just so much attention to detail and interesting bits of characterization and world building here and there, and I just love it. There's just so much of it.
yeah,
But I feel now that we have talked about all the great stuff about the gardens and why I feel the fandom is a bit too harsh on them, I feel we have to talk about the not so good things about the gardens. And that's while they're great, and while there's so much to love about them, and while I feel they are among the more underrated villains of Fire Emblem as a whole, to be honest, because they're great generally, there's one problem with them. A very big problem, and that's the execution. I wouldn't say all the execution is bad, let's say, but and I actually like the way they are like handled as this sort of villain in the sense. And as I said, I kind of have grown to like Solon, like he's kind of cartoonishly evil and kind of the same issues I talk with Ryu and Izuka, but he works decently well for his purpose, and I love his voice acting and just he's a decent mad scientist villain. And Cronia, she's just a weaker Narcian for me,
mm,
or a weaker Walter. Like, she has that sadism and fun, but she dies too soon. And that's a
yeah.
big issue with the Gothams. Like, they don't have enough screen time. Like, they are there, but most of the time, they're just there. And they die too soon, most of the major members. And Paulus, while he is the last one defeated, he doesn't have enough screen time. That's supposed to
They
be
don't
the
even
main villain.
get properly addressed in Black Eagles or in Blue Lions.
Yeah, they don't. And that's weird being Black Eagles when you consider Edelgard's connection to them.
Yeah,
And like, I really feel that like Paulus, like, he's a really cool I love his design and voice acting, and I feel that he has cool bits of characterizations, like his whole obsession with revenge to the point that he's willing to nuke the whole Shambhala if he has to. I
hmm,
love that. I feel that Paulus just suffers from the lack of screen time, and that he doesn't get enough room to be his own character and have his own motivations and backstory. And I feel that him having like okay, he has motivations. He has a clear motivation of revenge, and I love that. But he just doesn't get enough screen time to develop of even having a backstory. I'm not saying every single villain should have a backstory. A lot of the good ones we talked about, like Norton or Reeve, didn't have complex backstories. They still work. Before a major villain like Paulus, I feel like he needed to have a backstory. Like with someone like Cornelia or Solon, I'm okay because they're minor threats and they fulfill their purpose decently enough. But Wallace is the main villain. He's the main boss. He needed the backstory. He needed more characterization. As much as I love the characterization he gets, he doesn't get enough.
Yeah, like even
And
even Garneth had a backstory, and he was literally the most basic start.
yeah, like Wallace is like one of the two evil wizards that like don't really have a backstory. The other being Volador. Volador, he is just otherwise okay. Like with Wallace, it's far more frustrating because he could have been a really cool character, and he has some really cool aspects about him and decent characterization. But like a backstory could have helped him so much, especially when all the other leader characters have a backstory on their own. And here's the thing where I feel that Treehouse has kind of suffered because so much written around Edelgard, which is great because Edelgard is great, and I feel that the game mostly works well with it. But Ogod is already one aspect that suffers because I
Hmm.
feel that the game focuses on Edelgard so much to the point that the Ogod doesn't feel like it's time to shine because Edelgard is such a major villain, a major threat. Wallace never really has time to like become a threat on his own or become a more important antagonist because most of the time you're just focused on taking down Edelgard, and then two routes that continue after that. It's just, hey, by the way, you have to defeat those who slither and dark, and you defeat them in one chapter. So they feel more settling.
It kind of
And
feels like
again,
they were added in just to like easily hand wave away responsibility. Just be like, oh yeah,
yeah,
Edelgard wasn't actually doing all these evil things. She was actually working for this
yeah,
other
it's
group.
yeah, like it's kind of like we talked about Anankos to an extent. Because like we talked about how like Anankos kind of like exists, just like explain every conflict and everything that happened was because of him. And Agoda is gonna have the same thing. And most of the time, I think it works better because like the characters still have agency. Like Edelgard isn't completely removed of her agency, but like at the same time, it's kind of like frustrating to both characters, like both Edelgard, because like Edelgard still is a really good character, and I still think that the game works. She works better, but it's just kind of. But with the Gordons, they suffer really much of like having to share screen time with another villain. I feel.
There's a really strong foundation, a lot of really good ideas, but it's never carried through all the way, and it just ends up leaving kind of like this emptiness because there could have been a lot more done with it.
Hey, and I think that's a big reason why Agotan is probably the most basic villain for me, even of the ones that we talked about before, because like even a lot of them, like for example, Negril, I feel that being decent villain had his backstory being more clear, but I don't think that it would have changed too much. Same with Archibald, like he's already decent villain, but like he didn't mean much. Like with Agotans, he had potential to be one of the best villains in the entire series, I would argue. But they just don't get the time or the feel like they're more plot devices than actual characters, and that's sad because like again, it's really sad because there's a lot of good about them. You have some of the more interesting backstories and motivations and lore surrounding them, but it's never explored enough, and that's really sad. Like it's probably the only villain that's comparable is like with Garen because like it's not Garen currently easily being one of the best villains, but he was just
Yeah.
and it's kind of with the Gartons to a worse extent. So I think the Gartons are still pretty good but decent as they are now. But they could have been so much better had we just had more time with them. And being one of the best villains, like on the level of Zephyr and Lion, I think. I'm not joking. I seriously think that had the Gartons been better executed, they have been somewhat on the better villain side, like one of the best villains in the entire game. But yeah, I feel before we go to the closing thoughts, I'm kind of like, I have one more thing about the Guardians, and that's like, I feel that big reason of it is like, Animal sees them as generic evil wizards when they are not. They have a lot of interesting characterization and nuance and subtext. It's like buried so beneath the surface, pun intended. And while I get part of this is probably on the purpose, and like we said in the beginning, a lot of Fire Emblem villains gonna have this. They seem simple on the surface, but actually are more nuanced on the inside, and I like that. But at the same time, I feel that had a lot of this more motivation been more clear and more percent, that more people would actually like about it more because there's a lot of life. There are a lot of interesting conversation, motivation, and backstory. It just isn't presented in a way that's really clear to see unless you're like me and read every single line like 50 billion times. Yeah, Guardians are great, but I wish they had deserved so much better.
Yeah.
They're still one of my personal favorites because of how much time and effort and attention I've spent to them.
You've developed that emotional attachment, now you're kind of just stuck with them.
Yeah, basically. But I'm happy about it because it has been fun to write. But yeah, I think we're done.
So if you learned anything today, the lesson is Sacred Stones has the best villains.
Yeah. And Fire Emblem has like 3 types of villains. There are the villains that are really good. There are the villains that could have been really good, but they were screwed over by the writing. And there are the
Yeah.
villains that are serviceable. I think that's the option.
It's funny because we talked a lot more positively than we did negatively overall. There were only a few that we complained about, and even then, when we had complaints, we still acknowledged the good points they had to them.
Yeah, exactly. Like there wasn't any single villain we like said that we both disliked. It was more like this villain is like had a good aspect, but they could have been much better if they were better executed, or in some cases were in a different game.
Yeah. And I think that's the main takeaway, like the actual main takeaway from this. Every Fire Emblem game is different, so the characters are different. And you're gonna have ones that work for you, ones that don't work for you, but there's a variety to pick from. So find what you like.
I feel that's a good takeaway. And the other good takeaway is that Fire Emblem doesn't really have bad villains, just badly executed ones.
Yeah.
Even the worst villains like Anankos or Garon or Negral or the Agotan still have a lot of interesting aspects to them. The problem is more on the execution.
Yeah.
And I think that sums up a lot of Fire Emblem stories as well. That words Fire Emblem, the Fire Emblem stories aren't bad. They just sometimes miss the mark on what they want to do or want to do too many things at once.
Yeah, the concepts are there, the foundation is set, it isn't executed to the best of its ability, and as a result, it ends up feeling weaker than other entries.
That's all we have. I hope you guys enjoyed this. This was really long. My throat is sore.